we might start, because I have a tendency to talk a lot, so that's probably a good idea. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Hi, welcome to my talk. Who's afraid of the big, bad third-party integration? Who is? Yep, good. That's about half the room. The rest of you probably don't need to be here, but that's cool. I am. So, hi, I'm Bron Thulke. It's great to see a lot of friendly faces in the audience and a lot of friendly faces that I don't know as well. So a brief introduction. I am the CTO and co-founder of a travel tech startup called Yuli Travel. I've also been running my own web development and consulting business since 2008. And before that, I was working in a very cushy, comfortable job for 8 years before leaping out into working for myself. So all up, I count it as about over 25 years of actually being paid to do what I do, and sometimes not. And a freshly minted MVP in the last year as well, Microsoft MVP. So fun fact about me, in case you don't know, based on this, I love colouring my hair different colours. So that's me as pink. I could probably have a slideshow just of my different hair colours. Everything from fire, orange, yellow and red through to purple, and I think I was green one stage, but that was only because purple fades really badly on me. So I learned. In all that time, I've been developing a lot of different systems, my favourite thing to do is build systems from the ground up. So I do love getting into existing code and learning how other people's minds work, but I prefer being in my own brain. So I build systems, but what I do not love doing is reinventing the wheel. And so I tend to look out there and see what I can use instead of writing my own code for a lot of the things. So in that time, I've integrated with a lot of third-party systems, and mostly they've gone really well. There have been some times where things haven't gone so well, and mostly those times haven't been my fault. But, no, seriously. So first of all, what do I mean by third-party integration? Because there are lots of systems that you can integrate out there. Based on my background, a lot of mine has been integrating with the following sort of things, but your miles may have varied over the years, and I'm mostly talking about smaller systems here today, but I have been involved in big system integrations as well. So first of all, the biggest and most obvious one to me is payment gateways, and I've integrated with more payment gateways than I care to talk about. In my current system, so far we're at 5. I keep forgetting if it's 5 or 6, and we're still going, and we'll probably still be going for a long time because travel is fun. Every travel agent uses a different payment gateway, and fun fact, travel is difficult because there's a lot of reputation issues in travel, and there's a lot of holding money before you go on the trip and stuff, so payment gateways get specific about that. So payment gateways is kind of an obvious first one to start at. Storage systems, so like Amazon S3, Azure storage, Dropbox, even just local storage, but using third-party libraries to integrate with those can count. Accounting platforms. So again, my experience has been integrating with MyOb, Xero, and QuickBooks. There are plenty of other accounting platforms out there with varying sizes. Identity providers. So if you integrate with also one of our wonderful sponsors here today, and also obviously also is also Okta, but then you also might be integrating with Identity Server or Microsoft Entra ID, which used to be Azure, Active Directory. So yeah, that's identity providers. Cloud solutions in general. So you might need to integrate directly with Amazon or with Azure or with Google Cloud Platform. For example, we have white labeling solutions in our application, and so white label domains. So we can use an interface to automatically add those into our application server when we need to. GDS. Hands up who knows what a GDS is. Hey! A GDS is a global distribution system. It's basically big, massive systems that you can use to book travel-related stuff. So it's booking your flights, booking accommodation, hotels, car hire, tours, all that sort of stuff. And so one of the biggest projects I worked on recently was integrating with one of those. They're very well known to be god-awful to integrate with, like fixed width formatting of files or data that comes back to you, and XML still, and everything. I was lucky enough that I managed to convince the people that I was working with to select one who actually had proper REST API with JSON, but that's not always going to be the case. So CRMs and email campaign systems. So anything from like HubSpot, Dynamics 365, Campaign Monitor, SendGrid, things to send your emails. This is a really common one for a lot of systems. Even if you've just got a basic run-of-the-mill website, the chances are they're going to want to have a contact form, and you might use one of those sort of systems to send your contact form details to. But also in bigger ones, like I've worked in on systems for big telcos where they actually, under the hood, what they're using is just a big CRM that's been massively customised to them to manage all of your customer data and all of your mobile phone connections and disconnections and everything. It's all being done through a system that they're integrating with. And then there's the bucket, which is general data. And that could be just a random REST API that you need to pull down data from, like weather or whatever. Government data. Has anybody actually had to just pull random data from the government at any time? So I did during the pandemic. I threw together a website for the Vic exposure data, and their data was a mess. And it was, it got progressively better, but the documentation is poor. You kind of have to do self-exploration of it, and you kind of don't know what you're getting. So there's things to consider in there. And then also things like Google Maps or Leaflet or whatever, Mapbox or whatever mapping tools, geodata that you're wanting to integrate with. So it often starts out simple, like we're just going to integrate with one payment gateway. And then before you know it, you've integrated with 5 or 6, and then every couple of months you're getting asked to do a new one. You don't necessarily know that you're going to end up integrating with all these systems, and it is very rare that you would have to do them all at once. You'd usually start off small and then start adding systems in as you go. So why is it important to integrate with third-party systems? Because I know that for a lot of those things, it's kind of a no-brainer. I'm not going to process payment data. But for storage, why can't I just hold the files on the server and use my SDK to just save the data up to the server? Usually for a start, you can reduce costs by using these systems. You can reduce build time, you can reduce the amount of effort that is required, not by you, just by you, but by other people. You can also reduce your storage costs because they're probably going to be, if it's the sort of system like storage, it's going to cost less for them to store it than for you to store it. So there's many ways that you can actually cut back those costs. And then security. Although you can't offload all of your security concerns, there's big chunks that you can usually offload, especially obviously with payment gateways, but even with anything that involves personally identifiable information or PII. If you're avoiding storing that directly on your system, or if you're only storing a token and then you can look to another system to pull that information back, that's a win for you. It's one less thing that you have to worry about if the worst thing happens, which we won't mention or name. And then just in general, by using a third-party system, apart from the fact that you can usually get to market faster, you can also often get to market faster with a solution that is familiar to people. Like if you've integrated with the GitHub auth flow, then when people go to log in, if that's appropriate for your customer base, then when people go to log in, they know the flow and it's less jarring for them. If you're paying with PayPal and you're offering the Pay with PayPal button, then people know how to do that. So although you could say, I'll have my own payment form and you can hook that up to PayPal, and I've got a story about that, it doesn't have to be that way, and you can give them that familiar flow that they feel comfortable with as well. And you don't have to build that flow yourself because you can lean on theirs. So the first problem, of course, is what is the problem that we're trying to solve? And when somebody comes to you and says, I need you to integrate with this system, instantly, I don't know about you, but I start to, oh God, what is this going to look like? What even is this system? Especially if it's a whole new area, like for me with the GDS, that booking system that I had to integrate with. So the first thing that you need to know is, need to do is get to know what it is that you're solving, the problems that you're solving, and you need to look at the why. So first of all, read about the domain. So if it's, for example, a booking system, get to know the language. See if you can even get into client meetings, even if you're not talking, even if you're just a passive observer. You being in those meetings, and I haven't done a survey of the room, but I'm going to guess that there's a bit of a mixture of who is what in their role, right? So everything from developers through to salespeople. Like, I don't know about your business, but in mine, if we've got somebody who knows that they need to know information about the client to help the client in the long run, we're going to be okay with them either sitting in on the meeting quietly or watching back a recording later or whatever, being able to find out what they're talking about. Like, what does a booking mean? And a lot of my examples at the moment come back to travel, but if you're in retail, what does a checkout mean? And what is a shopping cart, and that sort of thing. If you don't know what it is, sit in the meetings and find out. And then the why of, like, why does a client want to integrate with that thing? First of all, maybe the client doesn't know what they want to integrate with, but they know what they need. So maybe the customer hasn't selected a storage system yet, but they know that they need to store a large amount of documents. And so if you understand why they need to store that, then that can help you to decide which platform is going to be right for them and what you should integrate with. But in terms of payment gateways, often the payment gateway the choice of payment gateway will come from the customer. And then you've got to ask them why they want to stay with that solution, and if there are other solutions available that could suit them better, and is there a path for that? But also, sometimes the client doesn't really know what they want. So it's a bit scary how often it happens that the client comes to you, and for example, the client will come to you and say, it's technically not a third-party integration, I guess it is, but I need to have a WordPress website. And that's a classic one that I've always had doing small business websites as well. And I say, why do you need a WordPress website? Because that's what I was told that I needed. And it's the same with cloud solutions. Yeah, we need to host this on Azure. Why do you need to host this on Azure? And then you start to ask the questions, and you can get to the bottom of whether it's actually because they need to have access to a service that's only on Azure for their other stuff, and they need to be able to integrate it in, or if it's just something that they've heard along the way. Why do you need to integrate with Google Maps? Because everybody knows Google Maps, but Google Maps costs a lot, so maybe there's a cheaper solution for them, and maybe they can do something in another mapping tool that they couldn't do in Google. So remember that you also can, hopefully, you're allowed to input on the choice of the integration that you're going to do. Okay. An example from my recent history is the PayPal integration. We were told that the customer wanted to integrate with PayPal. And in fairness, some assumptions were made that probably shouldn't have been made. What we didn't do was sit down with the client and say, why PayPal specifically? The only reason they wanted PayPal specifically was because it's what they'd used in the past, but specifically, they just wanted to capture credit card details. They didn't want anybody to use their PayPal account. They didn't want to tokenize their PayPal account so that they could come back and do that, because they as people who are running trips can't use it then, right? So because they can't have somebody call them up and say, I need to pay for my trip, and they say, okay, what's your PayPal username and password? That doesn't work. They had to be able to take credit card data, and that's actually all they needed to do. So we were able to simplify down the project and reduce the cost to them by getting in and finding out what they really needed out of the integration. So don't assume that everything is required out of the system. All right, so now the client, you know what they want, and they need to know how much this is going to cost. And this is where things usually get the scariest, I know for me, because I'm afraid that I might get it wrong. And what happens then? And how can I quote on something if I have no idea because I've not used that system before and I don't know what's coming? And of course, I have no idea what the other company themselves is like to work with. Are they easy to work with? What does an integration with this company look like? So there are a number of things when you're coming up to the quoting part to keep in mind. So first of all, make sure if you have past metrics, look at those past metrics and see how long it took. The last time you integrated with a system of a similar nature, how long did it take? And if you don't have those metrics, that's okay, but it's a good reminder to keep them this time around. So get everybody who works on it to put down their estimates their actual working time. And that includes everybody, not just the developers. So, I mean, a common thing that we fall into often is that our testers don't track their time against the project because they're just off doing all the testing. And then we can't come back later and track the fact that actually because this was a payment system and there were 20 different flows, that actually took them 5 days worth of solid testing, even if the development only took 3 days. That's a huge chunk of money that we haven't accounted for. So make sure that you are looking at those metrics if you don't have them, and if you don't have them yet, then start now. Allow time to, this is behind. Allow time for researching, building a POC, by which I mean a proof of concept, testing, and waiting on their support. So again, it's, as just said about the testing, but it's not just the testing, it's also the building of a POC. So if you aren't building POCs for an integration, for a payment gateway and stuff, then you are straight away trying to integrate it into your system and you're instantly adding complications for yourself. So if you scale back and just start with as simple a solution as you can and start building a simple, crappy looking payment form and get that flow working, connecting to their sandbox, then you've proven how long that takes. And the other thing by doing that is that you're also getting a feel for their documentation, and you're probably going to have to talk to their support a couple of times during that phase as well. And so that gives you an opportunity also to work out how much time you need to allow for different components. And I mean, often, and we'll talk more about documentation soon, but often documentation is happy path only. So by implementing a proof of concept and playing around with the actual code, you get to know it. Also, think about your future support requirements and maintenance. This one, again, it's going to depend on the sort of company that you work for and how formal your quoting phase is. But in a smaller company, often the cost of support gets forgotten about upfront. And then you come through to, okay, it's live now, and they say, cool, we've got bugs. And it's like, yeah, well, that's going to cost you. Now I need to make sure that you're okay with how much time I think that's going to cost me every month to look after your system. And keep in mind things like you need to update systems. You need to patch. As a podcast I listen to always says, patch. Well, you need to patch all of those libraries that you're integrating with. And you need to make sure that everything's up to date. And sometimes they'll completely change. Did anybody use Stripe and have to transition from before payment intents and after payment intents? I basically had to reroute our entire payment flow because it became a completely offline asynchronous processing of the payment. So instead of you go to the form, you fill out your credit card, you hit OK, and it tells you if it was successful or not, it became cool. Now we're going to tell you that we'll let you know your payment comes in progress, and you can check based on a webhook when it's successful again. And we had to rebuild that entire thing, and that cost probably about as much as the original build did. So you can't foresee that, but you can allow for it when you're quoting. And then think about the contingencies and be realistic about it and talk about them. Because, I mean, different companies might have different rules around having minimum contingency, risk contingency amounts. But, you know, if you're putting at least a 20% contingency in, it's probably a good place to, like, just stick a finger in the air and check the wind. Like, 20% is a good start. But think about what could go wrong. Why am I getting notifications from Teams? Did that come up there? No, good, excellent. Teams just not shush. I even exited it, so think about what could go wrong and discuss it with other stakeholders. And think about having like roundtable discussions where you throw out all of those worst case scenarios for the build phase that could happen and what they've seen before as well, because they might have had experiences that you're not thinking of because maybe you're a perfect developer and you've never run into an issue that you haven't been able to solve within a few hours. But maybe they've seen the reality, which is that most of us can run into things that can hold us up for days, especially with third-party integrations where we don't know what's going on the other side. Okay, I'm just going to quickly check why Teams is not. Yeah, there it is. There's another version running. Thank you. Go away. Okay. I wouldn't care except that it's pinging and it's going over my notes. Yeah. Remember that you're not alone in any of this. Well, I really hope you're not. And if you are alone, find other people as well. Like, don't be alone in this. And make sure that you're not leaving it all on your shoulders. Talking with the salespeople and making sure that they understand the risks that you need them to understand so that they know what they need to communicate with the client. So I guess that's the biggest thing. Like, if most of us in this room, or a large percentage of us, are developers, the buck shouldn't stop with us. It should come back to how it was quoted in the first place and how the client expectations were managed. And remember, communication is key, and be open about these concerns and ask others along the way. It's basically what I just said then, but. Okay, so past traumas. The other thing that usually causes ongoing PTSD. Poor documentation. Hands up who has never worked with poor documentation. Great. Have you always written perfect documentation too? And there's the problem. I know you're lying now. Poorly produced documentation, obviously not having enough, is a thing. It's a thing. But so is too much documentation. So some of the systems that I've integrated with, I've gone to their documents. First of all, I haven't even known where to start. And don't even get me started on the getting started documents, because half the time it's either too low a level or it's just no. It doesn't help me get started. And I'm not dumb, it's their problem, I swear. And also, again, it's always perfect world scenario. And it's, if you got to install this, but actually you don't have a requirement because you're using Windows, not Mac, sorry, but so is most of the world. So why does this only work on Mac, right? Why do you assume that I have access to Python easily on my machine? So go into the documentations, try and read it, and try and at least get to know that main path that you're going to be going through, and familiarise yourself with it, but allow for it. Badly designed schemas and data structures. So I've worked on plenty of systems where there's missing data, or you have to call back to the server for extra data. Hi, I need to get this customer information. Sure, here's their name and date of birth. Cool. Can I have all of the 50 other fields? Yes, you have to call back for that. Okay, but I'm enumerating over 30 of them. Well, that's fine. You have to call back 30 times. It's not scalable. They don't care. I'm not going to name names on that one. No. Bad experiences on test environments, unfriendly test environments, non-existent test environments. That's always fun. For a period of time, Square, the payment gateway, their sandbox didn't have OAuth available for the main flow. So you couldn't sign up to to Square through an OAuth and then get connected and use the system as a platform. And there's one person in this room who I know remembers the suffering. And then one day, magically, it was working. But I didn't know originally that we weren't going to have that, so it was clunky to test that. So it added like a good day of testing time. every time we needed to do testing until it became a nightmare, because we would have to go and find the developer console, find the right OAuth key, take that, put it in the database so that now we have a connected account. And by the way, we still haven't tested that OAuth flow because we couldn't test it through that. So things like that, they leave trauma, absolutely. Security concerns. So the doco can lead you down the path of insecure behaviours. Often documentation will have secrets just being put straight there in your file. Or they'll have you skip best practices because there's no room for that in the documentation and it doesn't look nice in the code samples. So be aware of that, because you can end up either with the trauma of remembering that a security key got exposed because they told you that that's how you could do it. So you had the security key out there just sitting there. So yeah, that's something that can be scary. And then support experiences can absolutely be traumatizing. So it's obviously not uncommon, especially for us in Australia, to be waiting at least 24 hours for turnaround on support. But how painful is it when the answer you get back is, it's not quite works on my machine, it's usually more like take a look at this documentation, it should answer your question. I did, that's why I'm messaging you. And then you've got to go back and forth, and they're always on a different time zone, so you lose time with that. And it leaves me, honestly, I break out in a sweat every time I know I've got to log a ticket, because I don't want to have to go to the difficulty, the trouble of putting together all of that information up front. So you've got to think about everything you need to ask up front. Hi, I can't do this thing. I've looked at this documentation, I've looked at that documentation. Here is the REST input and output, the request and response that I've already tried. Here is this, here is that, and you give them all that. And what's worse is when they come back and still ask a question that indicates that they didn't read anything that you put in that massive email. And I get so snarky with it now. I just respond back and say, I'm not responding again until you come back and prove to me that you've read everything I gave to you. Because my time is more important than that. So yeah, that happens all the time, and it leaves you not wanting to communicate with support. And that leaves you in the bad space where you try and solve every problem yourself, even when you're at a blocker. And that you have to be careful about. And at that point, maybe it's even, these days we can reach out to ChatGPT or whatever, your favourite AI. Maybe it helps you. Often it doesn't though, So just remember that one bad experience though does not mean that all bad experiences are going to be all experiences are going to be bad. Bless you. And the positive spin on that is that all systems are different. And I haven't yet integrated, developers in the room would appreciate that beautiful picture of having an interface, and it has, a get this and a put that and connect this, and that's great, and it's perfect interface. And then the next time you go to integrate, you have to add another one because there's another step that one didn't have. And by the end of it, you've got this Frankenstein of an interface that is completely not compatible with everything in it. And it just becomes a nightmare because they're always different. But that is good when it means that just because one was bad doesn't mean they're all going to be bad. The learning curve is a big, scary one. So how do we overcome that learning curve when we don't know something, that unknown, once we're actually implementing it? Well, first of all, read the docs. And I know that might seem obvious, but just read them. I actually am often surprised how many times I've seen somebody struggling with a problem, and I've done what their support's done, and I've said, I guess I'm actually self-validating what the support do, because I say to the developer, that's weird, that's not what their doc says. Oh, where's that in the doc? It's right there on the first page. Read the doc. It is important. If you've read the doc, then you can defend yourself when it's not in the doc. Find the test environment or sandbox, whatever they call it, and use it early. Like back in the quoting stage, you could be getting in there when you're building the POC. Most systems will have some form of a testing environment. So especially anything that's got an API, so use it. And if they don't have one, ask for it. Depending on the system, demand it. I've recently been speaking with a company to integrate something, and it's something related to payments, but it's not payment gateway. And I was so surprised when I said I need access to the test gateway and the test environment, and they said, we don't have one of them yet. And I just literally turned to my salesperson. I said, no, not until they've got that ready to go. I'm not going through that. It's not that they didn't have a test gateway, a test environment. It's that it was all the same and it depended on what key you passed through. And that's just no, because that also suggests to me that there's a maturity issue there. They're not ready for that sort of thing. Or if I say, well, actually that was another one with that one. It was like, so how do I do OAuth? And they proceeded to tell me how to do OAuth. And I said, okay, but that's not OAuth. You've just made me go in and add their details and pull a key out. And they're like, yeah, but that's authentication. No, that's not OAuth. So also, sometimes it's okay to be talking to them and teaching them what the right way to do something is. So consider who the best person is to take on the task. It might not be you. It might not be somebody on your team already. So if you don't have somebody who is already skilled up in that area, allow the time to skill them up. Make sure you put it into your quote. And if you don't have somebody who has that skill, reach out to the community. Like, our developer community here is amazing. Bless you. It is an amazing developer community. You can always find somebody who's done something with the system. But also check if there are partner programs for the solution. Microsoft have a Microsoft partner program. If you need assistance with integrating with a particular system or doing something with Microsoft and you don't have the skills, you can probably find somebody who you might have to pay to get involved, but it can be really worth it because maybe you're not going to implement the best practices if you don't know. So do consider reaching out to the community and others out there. I mean, sometimes it's a bit of a dirty word, but consider outsourcing the solution build. Like, if it's really something that you're just not confident that you have the skills for, it's okay to outsource it to another company or to get a consultant in to advise you along the way. Think outside the box also. If there isn't a .NET SDK, for example, and you're in a .NET environment, then consider whether or not this component could be a microservice that's using Python that runs off on another system. So just because you don't know Python doesn't mean that you can't learn it enough to build that little microservice that can do this thing. So. And also, one thing that seems to have dropped off the slide is learn about the things that you're going to be building, like OAuth. Learn what OAuth is and get to know it, because then when you're implementing that flow, the documentation will make a lot more sense to you. Remember that, oh yeah, it is on there. Why couldn't I see that? Might have been missing. So read about the thing, the particular flow or the particular spec that you're integrating with, and get familiar with it, and that will help you a lot to implement it with confidence. And also, when you run into issues, you'll be able to speak more easily with the support staff because you'll know what you're asking for. Remember that this is what makes software development fun. I mean, if you're a problem solver, all you're doing every day with this when you're integrating with a third-party system is solving problems. So get into it and have fun, and at the end, you will have another notch on your belt, and you'll be ready for the next integration. And with everyone, you might be a little bit more ready, a little bit more excited. So how do we set ourselves up for success in general? Some general, more general tips here. So look for an SDK or wrapper. And if there isn't one from the official company, like for example, HubSpot for a while didn't have an official SDK for a .NET, but they had it for other languages. But there was one on GitHub that even they were recommending. So ask around, sorry, I keep hitting that. Ask around, ask them what they would recommend. If you have to, then build your own wrapper, but first of all, see if there's one out there. Can you use a middleware? So this is something to consider early on, obviously before you start the build. For some system integrations, instead of integrating directly with their API, it might be an option to use Zapier or IFTTT. or a number of other solutions out there, so that you don't have to do that. You just have to pass the data through to that system and it passes it on to them. So I have avoided so far integrating directly with Xero because we just use Zapier and pass the data through. And then also all of those individual little client special requests can be handled by Zapier and they manage it themselves and we just provide consulting on it. There's also Power Automate. I think is it called Power Automate still? Yeah, it is, yeah. I thought I had a name change, but it might have been something else. Probably, yeah. Yeah. Read the docs, seriously. If you take nothing else away from today, is just read the docs and build a POC, which is 2 points on. Be prepared to have to code and have the skills for it in your team, as we just spoke about. So if you haven't done this before, then go out and build a POC. If you've got widgets that they're advertising as no code, don't believe it until you've built it. Because I can almost guarantee you're not going to like it the way it comes out of the box. So allow for that and have a play with these systems and tweak them and think about how you're going to build it in production as well, like not just how you build it in the POC. I know that we're not supposed to turn POCs into production code, and I never do. Often. Yeah, no. I never often do that. And there are ways to avoid ever doing it, like always start a brand new project, but then you can bring that code across. That's okay, right? You just copy paste the code across. And yeah, don't believe their example code either. Like if they give the most perfect examples on their code, on their documentation, and you're like, oh well, that's fine. That's all there. I can do that. So that happened with one. I've still got an outstanding, I can't remember if this is coming up on another slide now, but I've still got an outstanding project where the customer wants recurring payments and I can't give it to them because their payment gateway won't let me do it. And unless I'm prepared to integrate with SOAP, which if anybody is familiar with it, you understand why the answer is no. So if I had known that up front, first of all, I absolutely would have told them that before we signed a contract that said that we would one day deliver this to them. Thankfully, they're being a little bit more chill about it still, and I think they've actually given up silently at this stage. But one of the reasons for that is because there is documentation on their site that suggests you can do this thing too. But the only way to do it with the nice modern API is if you say, but you can only use that token for the next 30 days. And that doesn't work when people are booking travel 1 year out and they want to be able to have payments that come out randomly across the year. And I finally found that written on their documentation in literally fine print, like not fine print, but small print underneath the perfect world example. So yes, that does happen. Read the docs. I said already, build one proof of concept. Please do that, please. Common code and generic data structures. Use common code and generic data structures. So even though you think you're never going to build another integration with an accounting platform because this customer works with Xero and only Xero, even if you've got one customer and only one customer, they will come back one day and say, we're moving to MYOB. It will happen. And at that time, and they'll need them both to work, I guarantee it. So use data structures and abstract stuff up using those beautiful interfaces that work forever, so that when you go to integrate the next one, it's easy to switch it out. But also, generally when you do it that way, it leads to cleaner code for you because you can abstract away their ugliness and you can keep your code neater and you can have this one little really ugly back room where all of that junk is, where they're sending you, data in a fixed width format and you're parsing it and turning it into nice data structures. Sorry, I've left too many notes in here and now I'm questioning myself. So for example, when I make a charge with Stripe, I'm not making a charge with Stripe, I'm making a charge. And then that might be doing a charge with Stripe. When I'm sending an email, I'm not sending a send grid email, I'm sending an email. Because also in the next breath, I might be sending an email with Campaign Monitor. So keep it high level and abstract that away deeper down in the chain. And then I gave this one away already because you've probably already read it, but this is my hot tip that I always do whenever I'm kicking off a new project, is I raise a ticket with their support for something. It doesn't matter what it is. Find something in the documentation that you could question. Pretend you're pretend you can't read it for a second, right? Like come up with anything, even if there is an easy answer in the documentation, and raise a ticket with them. You'll get to gauge how quickly they respond, how they respond. If you can find something quite technical to ask them, you'll see how they handle that sort of question and how irritating it is. Because that will help you with your quote, and it will also help you to know about your lead times. So if you know that you're coming up to start building a system, you'll know that you are going to need to allow a little bit of extra time for that. So there are some extra things to keep in mind that I always try and keep in mind at least. So things that we often don't think about when we're, again, especially going through the happy path. So first of all, internal approvals for the required software. So this is one that I've had a couple of people mention actually when I've been talking about this, is that, like if your third-party integration is a system that needs to be installed on your local environment, like on a server somewhere, will your company allow that? Like make sure that you check that first. Does your integration require that you install something else on your system, even for the development, that they're not going to let you do without approval? So check on that first, because sometimes that can be a showstopper or certainly a long-time blocker. Find out what the go live looks like. So do you need to go through a go live checklist? Because, for example, with PayPal, we got close to our go live date, and then we were suddenly told, we were sent a checklist. And they said, you need to do all these things. And it included things not just like literally writing like slabs of text about how we're using the system and what our flow looks like. We needed to provide them with access to the testing environment so that they could see it and they could play with it themselves, which meant we need to set up all of the accounts and everything for it as well. We needed to send them requests and responses to API calls that we were doing. So I needed to get in there and debug it and pull that data out, right? Of course, from a test environment at least, but yeah. And if I hadn't seen that, then I wouldn't have known. And that took a good week to turn around. And thankfully on that project, we were able to push back the go live date. But it caused problems with our sprint that we were releasing it in. So check on that. And maybe that can be one of the tickets that you raise early on with their support to say, hey, I'm looking at doing this. What does go live look like for you? And another one that I had recently was actually, I've never heard this before, but it was one of these GDSs. And thankfully it was the one that we didn't go with. One of the reasons was because I said, so we're looking at, this was a meeting that we were having on around about the 20th of October or something, and it was a rush job. Like this was the old system was being shut off because of reasons. And so we had to build this system and build this integration within the next month. We needed to go live by the 1st of December. Of course, side note, that didn't end up being a reality, and on the 15th of December we finally went live because, I pulled out all stops, got it done, and then the customer said, no, it's okay though, we don't actually need it now. Can I have my last 4 weeks of not sleeping back? But one of the systems that they were looking at integrating with, when I said I think it wasn't the 1st of December though, I think it was like the 5th of December. And they said, well, of course we'll have to make it go live though on the 1st of December. And I said, no, but it's not, it's the 5th. They said, no, but we only onboard go lives on the 1st of every month. I said, well, hang on a minute, what do you mean? So hang on, you can do pro rata, because it was about the cost, the billing. And they said, no, we can't do a pro rata. So what we'll have to do is we'll actually have to do a launch on the 1st of November, which by the way was something like 14 days away. It must have been earlier than the 20th of October. But And they wanted to make us go live earlier, even though we weren't ready to go live. And then the customer would start paying from that point as well. And they had no concept of how to actually manage around our go live date. And that's a conversation that very nearly didn't happen because it was right at the end of that meeting. I just remember I came out of that meeting and I just said, I don't understand, how is this a thing? So yeah, check on that sort of thing. Talk about the launch dates, talk about the checklists before you even sign the contract. Oh, hang on, too soon. Data migration, consider that, because obviously that can get messy. So depending on the size of the system, but even small systems, data migration can be messy and it can require parsing data and manipulating it and fixing it. And if there's passwords involved or if there's tokens involved, it can get super duper messy. So take that in mind, keep that in mind, do stress tests on the data, mess your data up and throw that messed up data at it, all the things, because you'll save yourself a lot of pain when you come to do the perfect data migration and it's not perfect. And then compliance considerations as well. So if it's legal or regulatory compliance rules, GDPR might not impact on us over here, but it impacts on everybody over in the UK and Europe. And we need to keep that in mind when we're building systems over here, if anybody over there is going to be touching on it. And so if we've got PII, personally identifiable information, in our system that we need to pass over to that system that's on a server in Europe, or actually it's probably more the opposite way. If we've got UK people who need their data and it's going to be stored on a system in America, there might be issues with that. So consider that sort of thing up front and ask the necessary questions. What about your backup plans? And where do your backups sit? Because not only do you need to consider the backup of that data, especially if it's sitting on a third-party system, and ask them how they back that data up, but also, is it okay in terms of where that data gets stored? And if your customer deletes their customer account, is that data removed? And is the backup eventually removed? Because there are rules around that. The GDPR does allow for backups. I think it's something like reasonable amount of time of backups is fine, but there are limits to that because otherwise nobody would ever have to delete data under GDPR. So consider that. And also documentation, like are there any rules around how your minimum amount of documentation you have to have or the like. So all of these things also affect quoting, and so you should be taking them into consideration ahead of time, up front. So remember, when tackling new things and unfamiliar things in life, that you might not succeed every time. You might fall down a little bit, but you might also fly. And if you integrate with a given system perfectly now, it might become your new specialty. And before you know it, you might be picked up by one of those third parties because you do great integrations with their systems constantly. And so it could become a new job path for you. You never know. I've probably talked too quickly because that is the end of my slides. But does anybody have any questions? Yes?
I'm interested in sort of what you consider to be a proof of concept, like how far do you take it?
It depends obviously on what I'm building. A payment gateway is probably the easiest one because I consider it to be a charge that's been made, but also with some of those error paths as well. But if I come back to the slide about all of the different, there's probably a faster way for me to do this, but bear with me. Here we go. Yeah, so it's probably, to be honest, my POC would generally do the thing. Like, it needs to go that far, not just make sure that I can authenticate with it. I would definitely be making sure that I can do all the necessary authentication in the POC as well. And I would be making sure that I can do that end-to-end flow. Like the Square incident, that was a real like pain point because I was like, I can't get a POC working that goes from I am a new customer to I have just taken a charge on behalf of a customer. So yeah, so generally I would say I would make it work fully, but it doesn't look good. It looks ugly, and it probably does have some hard-coded things around the place, hard-coded secrets stored in user secrets in .NET, of course, or in your own file or whatever, because I would never hard-code that into my code, of course. Yeah. Other questions? Oh, yes?
I was quite sure, do I need to read the docs?
No. Only if you think you need to. If you don't know, then read them. Read the docs and build a proof of concept. All right, and that's it. Thank you very much, everybody.